in before we go to the audience.
Some people probably have heard of a country named Peru, where there has been an election there, and a candidate that won. So I wouldn't count with the absence. I would be very surprised of not having Andrés Manuel López Obrador as a candidate of the left.
I didn't say he wasn't going to be there. I said that I don't believe he can be elected, which is different.
Elected. Well, then I stick to my point. I think he can be nominated, and that he can be elected. And what's more, even though I've been a very open critic of him, even calling him, with strong reasons, I believe, the tropical messiah. And I tried to explain why I truly believed that in 2006. People change their ways, and people change their points of view, and it is happening in a way in Peru, and I don't see a reason why. I am pessimistic about that, but I don't see that there is a radical reason why not to expect that if he truly runs, he cannot make a certain movement to the center. But he would have to decide if he wants to be a democratic leader or a redeemer, and redeemers are not democratic.
Anyone want to jump in on that before? I know we keep promising you a chance to jump in, but anyone want to jump in on this?
I'll wait. I'll wait for him.
Wait, okay. Well, good. Well, we've left a few provocative thoughts out there to open up the debate here, and we fortunately have a good bit of time to go. So if you could identify yourself, let's start with Joe Duckert over here, and just wait till the microphone reaches you for the benefit of those that are on the video conference. Joe.
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Joe Duckert. I'm an independent energy analyst and a senior fellow at CSIS. I wonder if each of our speakers could offer his anticipation for reform in the judiciary.
And let's take one more, actually, next to you, Joe. Let's take about three, and then we can come back to the panel here.
I understood that in 2008...
And do you mind identifying yourself?
Sorry, Mary Dominic, a member of the D.C. Bar. I understand that in 2008, Mr. Calderon proposed to the U.S. government that drugs be decriminalized and that it was roundly rejected by the Bush administration. Last week, the Global Commission on Drug Policy with Kofi Annan, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Cesar Gaviria, and Ernesto Zedillo proposed that marijuana be legalized and drugs be decriminalized, and that was roundly rejected by the Obama administration. Could you comment on that, please?
And one final one. Is there a hand over here, Bob? If you can wait for the microphone, though. Yeah.
Bob Pastor from American University. A question for Sergio Aguayo. Sergio, you asserted that you were once young and innocent. I can affirm you were young, but I don't think you were ever innocent. Although, honestly, I was not there for the Immaculate Conception, so it is possible. But you then made some serious charges, and I want to pursue them a little bit. You charged that, in fact, the cartels are selecting candidates. I'd like to know, is this happening on a national level? Is this at a state and local level? Do you have any proof whatsoever? You also talked about buying votes. Now, as you and I know, we've been in the election monitoring business for a long time. You can't really buy votes as long as the vote is secret. Now, you can subsidize some people, which is nice, but then they still have the right to vote as they want, provided that the election is secret. So is there evidence that the vote is not secret somewhere as well?
Who wants to jump in?
On reforming the judiciary, there have been several waves of it. It has advanced in many a way. I'm not sure if it's the right reform. The legal establishment is largely opposed to it, particularly the oral part, and have done everything possible to put obstacles along its way. I don't I don't think there's much more to add to that. In terms of decriminalizing drugs, I think there are two different parts to it. If all drugs were decriminalized in the U.S., all of them, then that would diminish the firepower and the monetary wealth of the cartels in Mexico. It would not change the lack of structure, judicial and police structure in Mexico. So that part of it would not change. That part is unrelated to the other. Of course, with less firepower and less money, there would be a lesser pressure in it, but it would not solve Mexico's problems. So I think it's just part of the solution. It's not the real solution from the Mexican side.
Yes, Bob. About the selection of candidates, there are a number of testimonies and estimates about the influence of cartels in local government. The estimates, and they are completely uneven, but it is estimated by serious people that it goes from 40 to 60% of the counties or municipalities in Mexico that have been infiltrated by the cartels. Now, how many of the mayors were selected or co-opted or corrupted by the cartels? We don't know. There is not enough evidence, but we do know that the phenomenon is there, and on and off, the national leadership of the parties demand to the federal government, the CISEN, the intelligence apparatus, or the PGR, to make the polygraph tests to the candidates to see which of them have links to the cartels. But I am afraid that it is an underdeveloped science yet. We know that the phenomenon is there in some states, 8 to 10 states, and at least in a few hundred, if not thousands of municipalities. Well, if it's 40% of, 1,000, yes, I'm sorry, it's 2,500 and something, 1,000 and 200, something like that. I cannot tell you the exact number. And for the votes, the buying of the vote, there are different studies. When I was innocent enough to accept to be a member of the Citizens Council of the Cedesol, the Ministry of Social Solidarity or something like that. I was part of that for 2 years. And we ordered a study, a survey, throughout the country, and found out, that was 2005, we found that about 7% of the voters have been approached with an offer to buy the vote. And as for the mechanism, I can tell you many ways how it can be done now, because it has sophisticated, or it has improved, or it has changed the way, and it can be done easily, very, very easy, easier than you can think. Now, Cedesol didn't want to release the study, the survey, in 2006, so I resigned, and that's the moment when my innocence was lost. Bob.
Did you say 7% or 70%?
7%.
7%. Okay. That was 7% of the innocents. 70% of the innocents, 7% of the voters.
7% of the voters, which is a few million voters,
had been approached.
Have been approached. We don't know exactly how many of them have sold their vote. That's impossible to know.
To jump in? Any of this? Judicial reform? Nothing? Okay. We come back to you then. What hands over here? Gentleman right here. And Larry.
Hello, I am Aram Villasana, a student at the School of Public Administration at Tec de Monterrey. I have just 2 short questions. First one is, if you perceive a real risk that when changing the presidential administration, the war drug is going to stop, or is going to continue? And the second one is, across all the academic community, I have heard about a lot of criticisms of the new IFE because of the restructure. And I want to hear from you if there is something that the civil society can do to try to reinforce, to get more power and respect again to the IFE. That's the question.
Great, thanks. Larry Harrington over there. While the microphone's getting to Larry, let me say, if anyone's wondering where the coffee is, we'll take a break shortly, and there's coffee and dessert at the break. So we're not trying to starve you out here.
Look sleepy.
Larry.
I'm Larry Harrington. I'm Deputy Attorney General of the state of Tennessee. To what extent have the recent reports of extensive human trafficking from Central America through Mexico created any additional commitment, and is there the capacity, and to what extent is this issue a political issue in Mexico, and what's the commitment to increase enforcement?
Anyone here on this side? Gentleman over there, and then we'll go to Pepe. Then we'll go to Pamela to start off the next round. Do we have a microphone over here? Aha.
I'm Juan Carlos Hidalgo from the Cato Institute. I was reading this morning about the national security law that Felipe Calderón is pushing through Congress, and it gives broad powers to the military to stop people and get information from them using whatever means are necessary. That's the quote I read in the newspaper. I wanted your comments on this law, which looks like it pretends to militarize the government apparatus in Mexico.
Final question from Pepe Díaz Briceño, and then we will start with Pam on the next round.
Thank you. I would like to get your take about the problem of public perception of Mexico abroad. I think it's a very significant problem these days, and it'd be interesting if you could comment whether this is a matter of perception, as the President says, or is there real substance in the criticism?
It was Jose Díaz Briceño from Reforma. Who wants to jump in here? Enrique?
On two subjects. First is on what's going to happen with the war on drugs. I don't have a prophecy here to make, but I'm pretty sure, I would say, that there's going to be a shift, because the people the public in Mexico doesn't understand, doesn't support, doesn't see the results. There is a public outcry, I would say, to change for a change of policy. So the next government will have to devise a fallback position, and I would say that maybe there should be, and should be one of the main points of debate in the next election. For instance, what are they going to do with the tracking of money? What are they going to do with the jails, which are important? What are they going to do with the reform of the judiciary, with the police, and with the social problem of drug addiction? I mean, there are, as I have said, many ways in a more diversified approach, but all the 3 or 4 or whatever candidates will have to be questioned about their fallback positions, because none of them, I would say, will say, I will pursue exactly what Felipe Calderón has done, because that would be a perfect recipe for failure, for defeat, worse than failure. So that's the first. Now, in the second point I want to touch is about the public perception of Mexico. We have been very bad at selling the strengths of our country. Those foolish ads, live Mexico, Mexico is multicolored Mexico, and all those kitsch advertisements that you'd read in the New York and whatever, tons of dollars spent with no use. I've always thought that we have to reach the public, and in that, writers and artists and cinematographers and filmmakers and documentaries and all that have to play a role in order to make a direct appeal to the American public, not only to the American representatives and not only to the American president. Because once upon a time we had an imperial president who came here and talked to the President of the United States or went into Congress. It's not enough. We need an appeal to the public. And since I always like to be concrete, let me tell you what I have in mind. I mean, Mexican government or Mexican businessmen should have already devised a very strong, aggressive campaign, again, explaining to the American public, what every wonderful use of cocaine by Charlie Sheen or by Lindsay Lohan or by Paris Hilton, how many deaths per, I don't know how you call it, puff, happen in Mexico. I mean, we need to touch the American public. We need to do an aggressive campaign. We need to use the film stars. I would like to see one of the many famous, now there are many famous people here, Mexican people, explaining to the public and going directly, and do at the same time advertising and documentaries, or hire an agency for that purpose. No, but no, it's not a matter of only selling our wonderful beaches and our archaeological zones. No, we have to sell here what American addictions are doing in Mexico.
I fully agree with that, Enrique, of course. As of public perception, sometimes I think that the Mexican elites, political elites, don't understand that we are already an open country, and that in an open society you cannot control perceptions. Because if you read what foreign correspondents are writing about Mexico and compare that with the WikiLeaks, the content of the WikiLeaks, the US diplomats, you will see a coincidence. Basically, they are writing the same. Whatever it is, I mean, that there is corruption, that there is not organization, that so on and so forth. So it is not a question of controlling, because I think it cannot be controlled, simply. Perhaps it should be better that they establish a very good policy that is supported by the majority of Mexicans, in the case of the war on drugs, which is not the case. And that brings me to the second question about the militarization. I don't think that Mexico is militarized. There are some parts of Mexico that are militarized. That's a fact, because there are some regions of Mexico that are at war, but not all Mexico. And what is at stake, and that is a major question that will have to be solved by the next government, whatever the sign is, it is the role of the army, because the army is unhappy by the consequences it is paying, by the role it's playing in the war on drugs. And so a lot will have to be discussed in terms of the redefinition of the role of the army, a redefinition that will not change dramatically or overnight what they are doing in the streets, because that's impossible. And as for the electoral authorities, the drama of the electoral authorities in Mexico is a drama all the autonomous agencies, those agencies that are in charge of protecting a right and that have been controlled or co-opted by the political parties and who have put to control these institutions people that are loyal to the parties and not to the people. And that's a real problem. But it is the Electoral Institute, of course, I mean, the charade that they are doing now that we have been 1 year without 1 year without 3 councillors because the political parties have not agreed to name those the priistas. On the three of them, two priistas or whoever. I mean, one at the end you don't know who is the one that is vetoed. But the same is happening in the commissions for human rights and transparency, and the institutions protecting the elder and the children and women and gays. I mean, political parties are so greedy that they don't want to let autonomous citizens to be in charge of protecting the rights of the people, and that's a tragedy.
Why has that changed? Because there was a time when legitimacy, they seem to want legitimacy by putting independent people in some of these bodies.
It has to do with the budgets, the control of budgets, and quotas to give to their loyals in the different groups. I mean, and they name people that are not up to the task. Therefore, when you have a major crisis, you see the shortcoming of putting a mediocre person in charge of an institution, but that's too late. Then it's too late. As I don't want to make a prophecy, but I think that if things don't improve, in 2012 we are going to see major problems with electoral arbiters, which we have three: the Electoral Institute, the Tribunal, and the Attorney General's Office in charge of electoral crimes.
Please.
I think that there's an overriding theme here. In the absence of a sense of direction, of an agreed upon path to begin with, on a goal for the future and an agreed upon path further to get there, I think that every single group, every single political party, every single interest in the political arena and in society has been trying to advance its own cases, interests, and protections. Many of the issues involving the judicial reform have to do with these very different views of what the future should hold. The same is true of the national security law. That was started by the army, which wants both to have a regulation that works and that is respected and respectable, which I think is legitimate. They also want amnesty. They want amnesty for what has happened already. And that has put the political arena in high right because they don't know how to respond to this, how to do that, something that sounds illegal. Not being a lawyer, I'm not sure, but it sounds credible that what they want is to simply expunge themselves from any responsibility for what has already happened. And the same issue goes for elections. The first time there was an attempt to build a consensus on the electoral thrust, this is 1996. After that, everyone is trying to protect the party's interest, and that has to do with having authority over the institutes and to have them regulate things that may not be regulatable, simply because they want to avoid too much citizen participation. That's another reaction we're facing. And the only thing I'm going to disagree with Sergio is that I believe that policy does make a difference. Lula, if you want to look at Brazil has many more problems in many indicators than Mexico. To begin with, it's more violent. Yet Lula decided to privilege growth, to privilege agreement, to privilege any number of things, and that's the image he projected. And that was a result of policy. Those were a series of decisions of hired help in the U.S., like Enrique is proposing. Those things can't be done. Simply, for some reason, Calderón decided to privilege the attempt to control the drug trafficking organizations, and that's what he's been concentrated, and that's been his main motivation in his term. I'm not sure if he'll succeed, but he'll certainly fail in all the others.
We have about 10 minutes left, and so we're going to take just a couple more questions. I said Pamela gets the first question there.
Hi, I'm Pamela Starr from the University of Southern California. I have a question that comes back to the question of the issue of democratic politics and elections. And it has to do with this question of improving the quality of democracy in Mexico by reducing the impunity of politicians and increasing their accountability to the public. Now, we all know that one way to do this is through formal institutions. You can improve the quality of the judiciary. You can change electoral laws so that politicians are more responsible to the voters. but it also has to do, obviously, with something you all have been talking about, which is improving the quality of civil society. And when I think about doing that, we have to think about doing that within the context of what is Mexican society and how do you build a civil society within that reality. And when I think about that, I think about what is Mexico's shared historical experiences and how has that created informal ways of behaving in society that actually make it very difficult to form a civil society that holds politicians accountable. So I'm thinking of things such as having a very, very long history of a powerful centralized state that not only typically takes care of things for you, kind of cuts off your head if you try to do it for yourself, or a long national history of laws being suggestions instead of real rules that you have to. Worse than that, there is this, it has proved beneficial for Mexicans to get around laws, the very, very old saying of se obedece pero no se cumple. And then from the perspective of politicians, something that Luis said to me a long time ago is that politicians think they own Mexico. They don't think they should be responsible to civil society. Rather, they think, historically, that it's their responsibility to take care of them. All of that dissertation to lead up to two very specific questions. One, it has to do with...
And very quick questions, Pamela.
Very quick ones. I promise. I promise. Something Sergio said about back when we were talking about democratizing, we thought elections would be sufficient. Why? And a second question is, how do we begin thinking about dealing with these informal rules of political behavior in Mexico so that the formal rules encourage informal behavior that's democratizing?
Thank you. Good to have Pamela back, former scholar here. Luis Carlos and Fernando, you have the last word here. So last questions.
Hi. As regards for 2012, I think
Luis Carlos Ugalde, who's a fellow at the National
Endowment for Democracy, sorry. I think that regardless of who wins in 2012 or who loses or the margin or whether it is accepted by all candidates, I don't see much optimism as whether that can bring significant change in Mexico, because coming back to Pamela's question, I think that elections and electoral democracy has not changed the facade of Mexico in significant ways, because the basic structure underlying Mexico society is basically the same as the 20th century, which is basically clientelism, which is basically corruption to deal and to bargain among major groups. Some call it state capture, but that thing has not changed, and it won't change in the short term. So I think Mexico has made significant improvements in terms of fair and free elections, but that is not the point in the future of Mexico. So, and I don't see that any of the leading candidates or people trying to run for office will have the ability, the resources, or the will to do that. So I think that is a real question for the future of Mexico. It would be nice that elections next year have, as in Peru, which is something good, that Keiko, regardless of the margin by which he lost, comes out and say congratulations. But I don't think that is the point. I think the point is that this clientelistic structure is the thing that we need to change and has not changed, even when we already have an electoral democracy which is performing somehow well. Thanks.
Fernando.
Hello. I am Fernando Solis Cámara from Gruma and Banorte. I just wanted to comment on two very strong statements that Sergio made a couple of minutes ago, and I would like to let them just like that in the air. The first one is this very strong statement that cartels are selecting the candidates, that our friend, the professor of George Washington, also talked about. I would say that of course, there's a problem with cartels penetrating in some political institutions, but saying that 40 to 60% of the local governments are infiltrated, I think it's just a very adventurous figure that Sergio, I don't know if you have any way to sustain that. I think it's very high. I think that if somebody said here 4 to 6%, it would be as imprecise and as subjective as the 40 to 60%. And I would like to let the impression that that is something that most of us would accept. It would be really terrible that this figure would be true. And the second one is this idea that political parties still can buy votes in very easy ways. I don't think there's any easy way to buy votes right now. Not at least for sure in an urban state as it is the state of Mexico, which is 80% urban. I don't know if probably in some rural states or communities there can be some vote buying, but for sure in the state of Mexico, these 140,000 votes that are suggested to be going to be bought, I think it's absolutely impossible that can happen, unless Sergio can tell us that there is really several easy ways to do that. I think that the Mexican democracy is imperfect, but I don't think that the parties that are participating in an election would accept votes to be bought, and that the citizens would accept this to be bought as well, or that the federal or state authority would also admit that this could happen. Thank you.
Let's allow the responses from the panel, and then we will give you a chance each to make one very final brief comment. But Sergio, why don't you start, since you were specifically...
Yes. I wouldn't like to be the one that gives the shocking news, but yes, I do have data, I do have documents, and I do have information pointing that the infiltration by that the cartels are doing of the political system is bigger than we believe. In this case, I quoted Edgardo Buscaya studies, then I quoted a study made by the PAN, and finally, in the case of about 50% of the municipalities are infiltrated, which can be from the chief of police only to the mayor, of course. I mean, you don't have the studies, or at least I don't. Or the secretary or the secretary or whatever. But according to a study by the PGR, the Attorney General Office of 2008, half of the municipalities of Michoacán were controlled, in that case, by the cartels. Now, how generalizes that problem? I don't know. And that's part of the problem, that we still don't have enough information to realize how big the problem is. And that has to do with another aspect. The federal government didn't have the capacity or the will to gather the information or to make that information public. I'll give you an example. And when President Calderon declared the war on drugs on December 2006, Reforma started to make the body count. Reforma, a newspaper. It was the only, for 3 years and a half, it was the only institution, well, and El Universal later, and some other media, not the government. The first time that the government came out with a body count, that's a scandal in my opinion, it was in August 2010, not before. So we have a major problem here in the gathering of information and the publicity of that information. Perhaps that has to do with the fact that, the federal government wants to present a picture of that does not represent the problem. And that has to do, I will put another question and I'm going to ask perhaps this evening to Alejandro Poiré. What are the bases, how many innocent civilians have been killed? What is the methodology to know how many of the 40,000 killed or disappeared are members of the cartels and how many are civilians? We don't have that clarity. So that's the problem. As for the buying of votes, I'm sorry to say, but every local election there are stories in the newspapers and testimonies that are not followed by the electoral institutes. But that's not the problem of the reality. It is the problem of the electoral institutes that don't verify. And those come with a clear denial to explicitly say there is not irregularities in Mexican elections. I have not read that document. And in the case I mentioned, I have the document. It was public. Senator René Arce, senator, the leader of the leftist movements of the State of Mexico citizens, in writing promised 140,000 votes in exchange for a secretary in the State of Mexico government. I have the document. I can send it to you.
Not to be.
Well, I'm sorry. Then, well,
It's
just one final word. The essence of democracy is the freedom of the vote, and that each individual has the freedom to deliver his vote. When somebody announced that he's going to promise 140,000 votes, something is rotten in the kingdom of Denmark.
Luis.
I think that what Sergio has just described, I think, is plausible in many ways. Sometimes I think it has to do more with mafia rules, meaning it's not necessarily voluntary. It's lead or silver. That a governor in the 1990s once told me that in every single of a municipal election in his state, every single candidate was given a box with $200,000. They could use the money, burn the money, spend the money, save the money, whatever they wanted, but they had to accept it. Meaning they were implicitly accepting that either they get the money or get killed. It was not voluntary, it was something that happened. And this is not something new. How much that has grown and expanded, I don't know. In terms of the future, I think that there are some reasons to be optimistic. Clearly, talking about what Pam's question brought up, my sense that we need a thorough institutional overhaul which strengthens citizens' rights. That's, in the long term, the only way to go against the clientelism that still pervades Mexican society. It's the only way to strengthen, to build a strong state that can deal with these challenges in violence and in other realms. There are some bills along these lines. Some of them I think are good, some of them are not, but it's being discussed. Some of them have passed in the Senate at least. The case of Peru that Enrique brought before, I think is interesting because some of the arguments being discussed may not necessarily bring the kind of result one would expect. In the case of Peru, having 2 rounds of votes produced a very odd situation that nobody anticipated. Second round of votes in Mexico are part of the discussion or part of the debate where they should be included. They are not in the bills that have been passed at least. But it's the kind of discussion that Mexico needs to get under. It's the kind of discussion that has not taken place or that has taken place only marginally. At the end of the day, the problem is how will citizens make a difference? How will citizens be brought to become the sovereigns of democracy? They are not today, and they are not nearly today.
Enrique, responses to the audience, and then we'll come back for 1 minute.
Yeah, the question of Pamela's question implies a kind of endorsing a kind of political cultural determinism. And yes, you could even go back to the Spanish political culture, the Spanish heritage, which did not particularly favor not even the concept of a citizen and an authority that was accountable. And yes, I do believe that there's something in it. But Mexico is a part of the West. Let's not forget that. And it has proved in the last 30 years, and saying this I end where I began, it has proved in the last 40 years the will and the intelligence to change, and the strength of our institutions, for instance, the central bank, the transparency law, the free press that Sergio has stressed its importance, even the IFE with all its problems, we have made a lot of progress, and yes, civil society has also changed. We are far from having that responsible civic society. Yes, of course, but we are far. We are surely closer to that ideal than many societies which are not in the West. And even those societies, and witness what is happening in the Arab world, are changing, because Twitter and Facebook and all those things are doing wonders. So do not, the growth, we haven't talked about that, but the growth of those nets, the incredible growth of that kind of participation, in my opinion, the pull, the drive for the future is is stronger than the weight of the past.
To wrap up this extraordinary panel, tell us in 1 minute something we don't know. Luis. I invented that myself. No, it's from a Sunday talk show we do. Yeah, sorry.
I'd simply say that if one looks forward, the road ahead looks really difficult. Really looks tough, complicated, full of pitfalls and risks. On the other hand, if one looks back, it's amazing how much Mexico has changed. It's astounding how much Mexico, how much and how good the change has been, how different it is. NAFTA was thought out as a way to guarantee permanence in some reforms. That has also become a problem because many reforms are not being advanced because they are already permanent and we don't need anymore. But NAFTA has become an insurance policy against change, and that has fueled enormous investment in the country and the growth of many activities that didn't exist before. The same is true for democracy. We don't have a perfect democracy by any means, but the freedom, at least, that people can, that leads people to think, if not necessarily write anything in every country, in every part of the world, because as Dolly Esteves has often reminded me, the freedom that we breathe in Mexico City is not the same that can be breathed in Morelia or elsewhere. The fact of the matter is that we have changed a lot, and Mexico is a very different place. The question, of course, is how do we move forward? My guess is that the two big drivers of change in the past were citizenship pressuring and demanding from the government, and the economic crisis. Hopefully we won't have any more economic crisis, so it will be the citizenship that will be pushing for this, and many of these changes would not have happened without the citizens forcing the government to deliver something different.
Sergio.
Yes. I'm one of the privileged Mexicans. I cannot complain. I mean, I have a good income. I have tenure at my Colegio de México, a top institution, and places to write, and I'm protected. I live happy. And I could be very complacent. But I think that my duty is, no, I'm not innocent. No, I think that it's important. No, that stop. It is important to remind audiences like this one that there is a restless Mexico, an unhappy, very unhappy Mexico that is afraid, that is even bitter, because it has been excluded of the benefits. And that is happening in Mexico City or the metropolitan area, and unless we find ways to reconcile epistemologically and in the day-to-day life that unhappy Mexico with a complacent Mexico, we will continue to have tensions. Because at the end, I mean, this has been a schizophrenic roundtable, a schizophrenic panel. I mean, we shift from positive to negative. I have been tilting to the negative because I have been listening to the victims of orphans of democracy for the last few weeks with the movement, and it's very, very depressing to hear a mother that has lost his son and that her son and that she has not been able to find her son for 3 years. What you tell to that mother? What do you tell to that mother? Mexico is beautiful. The president is a statesman. I mean, but I acknowledge there are advances. Many of them are positive, some of them not so positive. But Mexico is not settled. The transition is not over, and there is still a long way to go until we have a Mexico that is a home for everybody, in which the unhappy and the happy find a way to reconcile and to dialogue.
This hasn't been a schizophrenic panel. This has been a pluralistic or a plural panel. Second, the grief of that mother is real and deep, and it's the grief of many mothers in Mexico. But I wouldn't blame democracy for that grief. I would blame many other things, and I would blame very much the criminals. And you have been right. The Mexican political elite, which has really behave bad. And as a final phrase, I'm thinking again about the flow of arms and the demand of drugs. And what we've learned that we already knew, but we're learning again, is that Porfirio Diaz had it right. Poor Mexico, so far from God, so close from the United States.
Well, thank you to our panelists for coming to the United States, and really a round of applause for an excellent panel.